So there are different types of muscle fibers. You guys have probably heard of like fast and slow twitch muscles, and that is what we will discuss here. So the first type is called slow oxidative, or these are also red fibers. Slow oxidative fibers are really good for long-term activity. They are very resistant to fatigue, and they run basically only on aerobic respiration. So for example, some muscles in your back, they are slow fibers. They don't move very quickly, but they are able to stay for a long period of time. So you don't want to be sitting here and all of a sudden have your back muscles get too tired and you just collapse over. The other type are called fast glycolytic, and these are very quick because of the way that their sarcoplasmic reticulum, and the sarcoplasmic reticulum is responsible for releasing calcium. So in the fast glycolytic fibers, the calcium gets released a lot faster, so the contractions can be quicker. They appear red and white under the microscope because of the different enzymes in different parts of the cells. So for slow oxidative, there are more mitochondria, more of a protein called myoglobin that I'll go through in a second, and there's more capillaries, so they appear red. In fast twitch fibers, these do not have quite the same number of capillaries or myoglobin, but they have a lot of enzymes that are really good for the phosphagen and the glycolysis systems, which are the two that we use for quick contraction. These proportions are determined genetically, so most of us are kind of aware of if we're a better long distance runner or a better sprinter. You can alter this through your training, but it's really a lot more difficult than just sticking with what was given to you genetically. This is just a microscopic image looking at the muscle fibers themselves. So you can see some of the darker ones are slow oxidative. These move slowly, but they're a lot more resistant to fatigue. And then you can see a fast glycolytic here that moves quickly, but fatigues a little bit easier. So within any individual muscle, you should have both of these. Just the proportion kind of depends on the muscle and depends on your genetics. As we discussed earlier, muscles desperately need oxygen in order to make ATP long term. So the ways that we do this, one is a protein called myoglobin. If you remember, myo means muscle, and the globe is like the shape of the protein here. So myoglobin binds to oxygen. If you guys have heard of a similar protein called hemoglobin, that is binding to iron and oxygen in the bloodstream. So red fibers have a lot of myoglobin. This allows them to get oxygen, which is needed for aerobic respiration so that they can continue contracting for a long time. White fibers have little myoglobin. They are very poor in myoglobin. They rely on the phosphagen system and the glycolysis system, so they don't really need as much oxygen, and they are contracting much quicker. So after strenuous exercise, our muscles are desperate for oxygen, and we call this state oxygen debt. This is when your muscles really are trying to regenerate everything that was used during the exercise. So this is called post-exercise oxygen consumption. You might see it abbreviated as excessive post-oxygen consumption. 11 liters extra that you're breathing in and out. And the goal of this is to replace all of the oxygen that was bound to proteins like myoglobin, hemoglobin, and then in your bloodstream you also have oxygen. It's important to replenish the phosphagen system, so in order to do that, we require oxygen. Reconverting lactic acid to glucose happens in the kidney and the liver. You guys will learn a lot about that later on, but that process to reconvert it back to glucose requires oxygen. And then after we exercise, our metabolism is elevated. So we need to use more oxygen just to maintain our normal homeostasis. So something that might be interesting to a lot of you is strength and conditioning. So how strong and how fast muscles are able to move depends on many different factors. They're listed here. The biggest one is like the size of the muscle. But as we all know, you've probably seen like some really buff bodybuilders or something that look really huge, but their muscles aren't actually very strong. But generally, that's going to be the primary determinant. The arrangement of the muscles, so some muscles are like square shaped, some are long shaped, some are like circular shaped. Depending on the shape, that determines how strong the muscle is. The size of the motor units, so remember a motor unit is the muscle fibers and the nerve that innervates them. So bigger motor units equals stronger contractions. And then the number of motor units being recruited will get a stronger contraction. More nerve impulses, so the more signals that your brain is sending to contract, the more contraction you'll get. And then that length-tension relationship, so that optimal resting length that we talked about is really important in how strong a contraction will be. There are two most common types of strength and conditioning training. So there's resistance training, which is doing weight lifts in the gym. And there's endurance training, which is like running, biking, swimming, doing lots of aerobic work. So with resistance training, the goal is to enlarge the cells. So we call this hypertrophy. The actual cells are increasing in size, and some of them might split, but for the most part, this just increase in cell size. Endurance training changes the makeup of the individual muscle cells. So we get more mitochondria that are making ATP. We get more glycogen, and your body can actually create more capillaries that are little blood vessels to help supply more oxygen to the muscle. So muscles, skeletal muscles, are not extraordinarily efficient. At rest, about 58% gets released as heat, and we only use the other 42%. When we're active, almost 85% is being released as heat. So as you can see, if we're releasing that much heat, the body temperature is going to go up while we're exercising. If you become too cold, this is why you start shivering, because you can increase your body temperature a lot just from starting to shiver. Releasing 85% as heat helps to warm up the body.